Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
And Julie Andrews pleaded not guilty, saying that she brought the gun to the nightclub for protection.
And that's all for today's Channel 5 News at 6. Oh, I almost forgot, that little girl is still missing. We have a picture? We don't have a picture? Okay, we don't have a picture, okay. But she's Puerto Rican, so look out for a Puerto Rican. We're clear.
Audio Jungle.
When we watch television, read a magazine or newspaper, listen to the radio in the car, we are engaging in mass communication, which is any media that addresses a large audience. Mass communication influences our knowledge and perspectives by giving us impressions of people and events, and shows us what is important in our society. Mass media directs us to pay attention to certain topics by agenda setting. 2/3 of Americans get their news from the television. Television news networks choose which stories to air in their segments, which ones not to. This research explores the race and gender-related selection bias of missing children cases in national television news. In 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart went missing from her home in Salt Lake City, Utah. She was missing for 9 months, and in the meantime, many other children went missing as well, some who never returned. Despite this, Smart's story received frenetic media attention. Howard Kurtz of the Washington Post said that a missing child's race and social status matter when it comes to media coverage. He said that because Smart is a young, attractive Caucasian girl from a rich neighborhood, led to her getting disproportionately more media coverage than Alexis Patterson, a 7-year-old African-American girl from a poor Milwaukee neighborhood. In 2002 alone, there were 800,000 reported cases of missing children. Of those, 51% were male and 47% were racial minorities. It appears that television news mostly covers the cases of white missing children, especially girls. Locating missing children is an important task, and news media, especially television, plays a big role in recovery of these children. According to a study done by Kunkel and Smith in 1999, children are usually underrepresented in the news, with child victimization stories being the exception. These stories are considered to be more newsworthy because crimes against children are viewed as more morally detestable, and that news stories with child victims are more likely to elicit viewers' emotions. Previous studies done by Byerly and Ross in 2006 that were dealing with adult cases showed that mainstream news in America overrepresents white victims and unfavorably depicts minorities. The goal of this research study was to determine if there was also a news bias in the coverage of missing children cases. There are well-documented accounts of news bias favoring white individuals. For example, in a study done by Dixon and Linz in 2000, it was seen that African Americans and Hispanics are overrepresented as criminals, while white individuals are overrepresented as victims. This would be due to the fact that we live in a predominantly white society, and news journalists are motivated to cover stories that they believe the majority of viewers will be interested in. For instance, focusing on dramatic stories where the victims are of the majority audience group. Stories about people who are the most similar to oneself are more appealing to the viewer. In order to reach a larger audience and thus make more profit, news networks may feature more stories involving white victims. Rogers et al. In 2005 also found that women are underrepresented in news coverage as well. When women appear in the news, it is often in stories where they are framed as victims. This suggests that female missing children cases will be overrepresented in news coverage. From these arguments, the researchers aim at answering 3 research questions. Are African American missing children cases underrepresented in national television news when compared to the actual rate of incidence? Are missing children cases overrepresented in national television news? And if there is any relationship between missing child situation types and the race and gender of the children covered in the news?
The researchers analyzed missing children stories in national television news and compared race and gender proportions to official missing children statistics provided by the U.S. government. They focused on missing children cases at the national level because there is a large number of cases. Also, television is the optimal medium for this topic because it is able to provide up-to-date information better as compared to news mediums such as newspapers. News clips of missing children cases were obtained through the Vanderbilt Television News Archive, which contains all evening newscasts from major national broadcasters for the past several decades. The Vanderbilt Database Archive was searched for missing children stories, which included newscasts from ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and Fox News stations between 2005 and 2007. Each story was analyzed on which network the story aired on, gender, race, and situation of the case. There ended up being 115 male cases, 70 female cases, and 3 cases where gender was indeterminate. Race was coded as being African American or non-African American, since in the FBI missing children database, Hispanic Americans and Caucasians are grouped together in a white category. Within the sample, there was 36 African American cases and 149 non-African American cases. The situations were coded as either kidnapping and death or general missing. The data was analyzed using a z-distribution test for independent proportions to see if the observed number of cases deviated from the expected number of cases more than by chance.
Research question 1 asked whether African American children were underrepresented in the media. Out of the news stories analyzed from 2005 to 2007, the proportion of stories about African American children was 19.5%, while the actual proportion of missing African American children, according to the FBI database, was 33.2%. From this, we can see that incidents of missing African American children are significantly underrepresented in television news. Research question 2 inquired as to whether female missing children cases are overrepresented in the television news. 37.8% of missing children stories reported involve female children. In actuality, the FBI dataset reports that the proportion of female missing children incidents is 57.4%. Therefore, female missing children are also significantly underrepresented in television news coverage. The last research question asked if there was a relationship between the coverage of race and gender groups and types of missing children cases covered in reports. The 4 demographic groups, female, male, African American, and non-African American, were cross-tabulated with the 3 missing children categories: death, kidnapping, and general missing. Research found that the coverage of kidnappings of non-African American girls was significantly greater, and the coverage of death cases for African American boys were significantly greater than for the other categories. Shoot.
The results of this study suggest that the coverage of missing children cases may be disproportional based on race and gender. In previous research, Kiever et al. Has found that there is disproportional news coverage for minorities. The underrepresentation of African American missing children suggests that judgments of newsworthiness for missing children cases may be affected by a predominantly white cultural perspective in news organizations. This could also be due to the fact that news organizations exist to create profit, and to do so they must appeal to the population, which in the case of the United States is overwhelmingly white. Past research has argued that women are overrepresented as victims, but the results of this study suggest that girls were also underrepresented relative to actual rates of incidents. However, the overall coverage of non-African American female kidnapping cases was greater than expected. The evidence collected from this study that points to missing children and minorities being overlooked in the media should call for our news organizations to reevaluate their priorities. Ethically, they should be responsible for providing equal coverage of all missing child stories. There are 3 limitations relating to this study. The first is that race and gender were the only factors investigated to be associated with the amount of coverage. Other factors such as social class or affluence of the child's family could also have an impact on the case receiving coverage. The second limitation is that the FBI set made it impossible to look at individual races such as Hispanics because the database only includes the categories African American and non-African American. The last limitation is that this study only looked at news coverage. A future study could investigate how much attention is given to missing minority children's cases. This article relates to Chapter 14 of the textbook because it deals with news organizations, which is a form of mass communication. We get a huge amount of our information from the news, and due to the media bias of what stories cover, we may end up with a skewed view of current issues, including missing children. This paper also incorporates the idea of the uses and gratification theory because we use the news media to gratify or reflect the interests and concerns of middle-class white Americans, which is why mainly white missing children are represented in the media. The chapter mentions the influence that mass communication has on human knowledge and perspectives. This can be defined by terms such as agenda setting and gatekeeping, which both explain how important people or groups in the media select and control which issues the public should pay attention to. The media leads us to ignore certain stories by not giving them coverage, which is why this study was done in the first place. In conclusion, this study shows how much the media has control over what we see and what we don't see as current issues. Although news organizations are morally responsible for presenting unbiased stories, the drive to gain profit appealing to the majority audience overshadows this. We can only hope that the public stays skeptical of the media and understands that news organizations don't always tell us the whole story.